Hey everybody, what's up? This is Mr. Honish coming to you with some information on comparative advantage today. Has to do with our study of globalization. I'm psyched to talk about this because uh, we get to talk about shoes. I'm not actually that big into shoes. Eli Self, you've been waiting for this one, man. I know you have. So we're going to talk some comparative advantage, how this impacts businesses, what this has to do with globalization. Let's get right into it. So we're talking about comparative advantage and really the origins of your stuff, items that you own. We're going to look at where those come from and why they come from there. First, we need to understand what comparative advantage, this term that we'll be using over and over again, we need to know what that is. It's the ability to carry out an economic activity, whether you're making something or providing a service. It's the ability to do it more efficiently than another activity. This is not the same as just doing something better. That would be absolute advantage. Comparative advantage is being able to do it more efficiently. Now we'll look at what exactly that means. I want you to think back to specialization and the division of labor. If a worker is assigned one specific task, they can do it effectively and efficiently. You keep making burgers, you get really good at making burgers. If you're slicing up toppings, you get really good at slicing up toppings. You might not be the best tomato slicer the world has ever seen, but you can do it efficiently if you have specialized in that. Now, some jobs, maybe tomato slicing, for instance, don't need much skill and they can be done by low wage workers, someone that doesn't get paid a whole lot. That is something to keep in mind as we move forward. But I want to start with an example. This is a little outdated by now. I think we're pretty much over this whole Fortnite fad. I don't know. Some of you still probably on it, but let's take a look at three hypothetical players here. You're going to squad up in Fortnite. Player A, Player B, and Player C. Now, as you look at this, they all have different skill sets. Player A is an outstanding builder, great defense, slightly above average with his gun skills, and an above average strategist. Usually can run circles around their opponents. Player B is an average builder and has average gun skills and is an absolutely terrible strategist. Their ideas are always going to lead to defeat. Terrible. Player C is above average in building, average gun skills, and an average strategist. Now, if you were to try and divide up the labor, if you were going to try and specialize these three workers, if you will, who would do which job? Who should be building the structures and worry about the defenses? Who should be the designated weapons person and the designated shooter? And who should be the one taking the lead on strategy? Automatically, you start to compare the three. Now, Player A is an outstanding builder. They have a direct advantage over Player B and Player C when it comes to building. They have a slight advantage compared to Player B and Player C when it comes to gun skills, and they have an advantage when it comes to strategy as well. But should Player A do all three of these responsibilities? They're the best overall in every single aspect. But it wouldn't be very efficient if we overloaded them with all three of those jobs. So we're going to have to figure out who should take some of that responsibility over. Now, Player B, we could probably rule out strategy right away. They're average with the gun, average building. So it's probably going to be one of those two that take advantage of their skill set the best. If we look at Player C, average here and average here, but above average builder. So if we take Player A, where they're an above average strategist here, and if we take Player B with the average gun skills and Player C as the above average builder, we've kind of maximized our talents across the board. We've split it in a way that maximizes everyone's specialty. So Player A had the absolute advantage in every category, but it's really not a great idea for them to do all three roles. Comparative advantage is when we kind of go through that process of maximizing the strengths each player has to offer, figuring out how to do it most efficiently. The global economy works the same way. There are things that really require no or low skill levels to produce. So think about what kind of pay that would be. If it's something that is really simple, that anybody really could be trained to do in a very short amount of time, there's really not much demand for high pay there. On the other hand, some jobs require really high levels of specialized training. Like, I don't want to brag, but like it does not it's not possible to walk into a class of middle schoolers and effectively teach unless you've got some big time specialized training. You guys are I'm going to skip that. Sometimes you're working with very sensitive materials. Sometimes there is a super, super high risk involved. Like, you don't want someone that was trained for 2 hours to do brain surgery doing your brain surgery. Sometimes very, very, very specialized training and education is used for certain jobs. What kind of pay do those workers demand? Well, if they're one of only a handful of people that can do it, probably a lot higher wages. So a business needs to sort of decide, as they're ensuring that they have comparative advantage, they need to figure out what kind of workers to hire to do things in the most efficient way. Can they get by paying someone with low skill level to produce something with the same eventual quality? Or do they need to invest in someone that has higher levels of specialized training? So to really illustrate this point, let's talk shoes. Shoes. Let's get some shoes. Do you even get that reference? This is probably like a 15-year-old YouTube video by now. Man, I'm old. Back in the 50s, Chuck Taylors. You know Chuck Taylors. See them up here. Multicolored, canvas top, rubber sole, absolutely horrendous levels of comfort. Well, these shoes were among the first pure basketball shoes, and they were made in the good old US of A, America, until the year 2001. That is the year the last pair of Converse Chuck Taylor All-Stars rolled off the production line in North Carolina. Where are they built now? Does anyone know where they're built now? You can look it up. You could probably guess right off the top of your head. They're no longer built in the United States. Many are now built in China. Why might that be? Why did they stop making these shoes in the United States and move them over to Asia? Comparative advantage has something to do with it. How much skill is needed to put together this pair of shoes? Think about what minimum wage is in North Carolina compared to a country like China or Indonesia or Vietnam or Malaysia. If you can get the same quality work somewhere else for a lower price for your workers, the company needs to consider that. Today, let's look at basketball shoes of today. Now, I'm sure the sneakerheads out there are looking at these like, well, that's last year's model or like whatever. I'm not that big into sneakers. Where am I from? The Northeast? I'm not that big into basketball shoes. I will admit that the freaks are awesome because, you know, Giannis and the Bucks, but these kind of shoes, do these take more specialization to construct than the Chuck Taylors? To be honest, not really. You're churning these out in mass production numbers. I mean, you're going to make thousands and thousands of pairs of these shoes, and it doesn't really require a lot more than some basic stitching and assembly skills. So let's talk about what makes a shoe cool then, more from the consumer side. Why do you pick the shoes that you do? And how much would you be willing to pay for the ultimate pair of shoes? Think about that right now. What makes a shoe cool? Why do you pick the ones you do? What would you be willing to pay? I'll tell you that I think color does matter. There are certain color combinations that really turn me off. I don't want to buy a shoe if it's in certain colors. Really though, I pick shoes based on my foot size and my stride. I've got pretty wide feet. I'm kind of limited. I can't get regular size Nikes because they run kind of narrow. When I pick running shoes, I'm very, very particular about my stride. Different brands match that in different ways. But what would I be willing to pay for the ultimate pair of shoes? Whoops. I've never gone higher than 130, and that was like a big time splurge. I know some basketball shoes out there are, 200 plus. A few years ago, big baller brand, we were talking $500 a pair. I don't know, maybe some of you are like, 40 bucks, good, nothing beyond that. Your choice. I'd like to take a blast from the past, tell you a story from a couple decades ago, my own story about lit shoes from 2001. Lit shoes? Can I say that about shoes? Lit? It's a little dated by now. I don't know if things are really lit anymore. Just this online learning thing has me out of the loop as far as what's cool now. Okay, here we go. Prepare to be amazed. The most lit shoes of 2001, the Adidas SS2G. What is the Adidas SS2G, might you ask? That is the Adidas SS2G. I know. Curb your enthusiasm. Please hold your excitement in. I know that they're just the coolest shoes we've ever seen. Now, if you look at these shoes, you might think that they're kind of ugly because, frankly, I don't know, they are. They're really not that different than the Adidas Superstar, which is actually making a comeback, I'd like to add. But man, when I was in middle school, if you had a pair of these, you were somebody, man. I tell you, like, this was a status symbol. It was really kind of embarrassing. I had the white on white with the gold stitched SS2G, and that was like really, really fresh and crisp for like a day until I got some dirt on it, which just goes to show, like, what are you really paying for this appearance? I don't know. I think about my shoes compared to Sean Newman. And Sean Newman, if you're watching this, Sean Newman, I'd really like to get in touch with you because I got an apology for you, my man. I stuck my foot in my mouth. I put my shoe in my mouth, maybe. I stuck my foot in my mouth when I noticed that Sean Newman had a pair of these with 4 stripes. And I thought it was like a factory mistake. And I pointed it out to him on the playground. I said, hey, there's something wrong with your shoes. You got 4 stripes. He says very matter-of-factly, yeah, I know. My family's too poor to buy Adidas. It's an off-brand. I was like stunned. I didn't know that was a thing, which just goes to show sometimes I don't even know what you're paying for. I thought they looked similar enough that I thought there was just a problem with the stripe number. So what is a fair price for shoes? I mean, are the materials that different in a $200 pair of shoes compared to a $50 pair of shoes? I don't know. If you think about where those raw materials come from, where does rubber come from? Where do those materials come from, nylon, that are used? What skill level is required to make them? When you consider all of this, companies have to decide where to make shoes based on comparative advantage. So the reason for going to Southeast Asia is because what materials are necessary? Honestly, a lot of materials for shoes can be found in Southeast Asia, like rubber, for instance. What skill level is required to make them? The stitching is pretty much the same, whether you're making a $200 pair of basketball shoes or a $20 pair of cheap sandals. Skill level is pretty much the same. A lot of companies, you can look at the tongue on your own shoe, the label where it says what country it's made in. A lot of countries have used comparative advantage and figured out they can find someone with enough skill to make the shoe successfully, but pay them a lot less. This allows them to jack up the price and keep a lot of the profit. Now, before we sign off with this, first of all, I'd like to point out there is an accompanying task that you could do. It's called the Global Sneaker. That is linked in Schoology. But just for your own personal introspection, honestly, does it matter what shoes you wear? Does it matter what clothes you wear? Is it worth having a certain brand at any cost? I mean, maybe there's a right answer. Maybe there's not. I think I would be a little bit of a hypocrite if I said that the brand didn't matter. I mean, I'm sitting here wearing a Nike sweatshirt that probably cost the company, I don't know, $5 to actually produce and package. And I'm not going to tell you what I spent for the sweatshirt, but let's just say it was several times more than $5. So I get it. I know that companies are taking advantage of comparative advantage to produce things with really low wages, because let's be honest, it doesn't take that much skill in a factory setting doing a specialized job. Where is this made? Let's see here. This is, what is that? I can't even read it. Vietnam. It was made in Vietnam. And I bet the workers that made this in Vietnam are making a very low salary. Keep that stuff in mind when you're looking at where your own stuff comes from, what countries produce it. Think about the wages of the workers. There's a lot of economics at play here. There's a lot going on in the background. So honestly, there's a lot to consider when you look at where your stuff is from, what price you pay for it, and when you think about what matters to you as a consumer. I know this was a long video, but like I said, got to talk about shoes. Got to get the sneakerheads out there what they want. But that's all for now. Bye-bye.